Thank you for joining us again. I'm Raffi Doudaklian, and we will continue our discussions with many guests that we're having tonight. And now I have Mardin Galstyan with me, an economist and a visiting professor at the American University of Armenia. And it's so nice to have you here with us, Mardin.
To be with you.
We have been discussing diaspora-Armenian relationships after 102 years of genocides, the history, the remembrance, the existence of the so many communities, the relationship with the new Armenian reality, with the independent Armenia. You've been to many countries in the world. You've seen many communities in different parts of the world, Armenian communities, and we realize that diaspora has been part of the Armenian reality even before the genocide. We had the pre-genocide diaspora, we have the post-genocide diaspora, and then we have the post-independence diaspora. How do you see that? How do you characterize that? What are the similarities and the differences?
So starting from dissecting the diaspora, I would like to kind of agree with you in terms of diaspora being heterogeneous. So as you mentioned, we do have different types of diasporas and with their own different types of agendas and their problems. And I believe that probably the focal point for many of them in terms of individuals would be current existence of Armenian state. But there are also many differences. So, for example, people who live in Russia, they have their own priorities, making their living, making their business in an environment which is somehow known to them. Because Russia and Armenia have been part of the Soviet Union and there were no so many cultural differences. Meanwhile, people who lived and are currently living in the United States and Canada and Australia and other parts of the world, probably for them, the first and most, they think about trying to preserve the Armenian identity, cultural heritage, schools, churches, cultural clubs, and so on and so forth. So for them, focusing on the identity issues and probably more focusing on the genocide and trying to come to this lawful recognition of the fact would be paramount of their activity. But there is also a current reality which is we're facing, for example, in Syria, and we're faced in Egypt and some other parts of the world, that meanwhile you could be very efficient in promoting your own agenda, but under some unseen and unforecastable circumstances, some exogenous shocks could hit. Wars, I don't know, mega powers cannot divide and so on and so forth. So you come to realize that even being very organized community within other state doesn't give you the full safety that you could somehow believe and have in your own state, which is state of Armenia.
With this specific subject, probably we need to mention Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine. We had many communities there, strong, powerful communities, vibrant communities, and now a lot of them have just collapsed, or they are, or a tiny community is left after so many years of, existence issues. Interesting. The post-genocide diaspora was more about self-preservation, fighting for the recognition of the genocide, and asking for their rights, and keeping their identity. Isn't it the same in the new diaspora, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in some of other Eastern European or former Soviet countries? Do they have the same issues there now?
I would say that as far as I know, and as far as I see, and being many times in Russia, probably they feel much more comfortable in Russian atmosphere, because Russia is somehow replication, not the replication in a way in terms of legal status, but culturally. not many things have been changed, and that not many things are unknown to this current Armenian diaspora living in Russia. So the rules of the game are the same for Russians and for Armenians, and there is no this feel of unsafety, right? So that's why probably for them, given the Soviet background, probably it's much more easier to make their life and make their business in that countries. So my assumption would be that the role of self-preservation, though being very important, but it's not as critical as it has been after the genocide for those communities that were established, have been established in Middle East and then Western Europe and United States.
So basically they feel at home, kind of, the new diasporans, the new generations who have migrated from Armenia to post-Soviet countries. I
would say they feel much more comfortable and much more safe in a cultural sense, because most of them, they speak language, so they can communicate. And they have shared kind of experience with those people who are living.
They don't feel that they're refugees or survivors or political, asylum seekers.
Yeah, my educated guess will be that you are absolutely right. So they feel somehow at home, more than being kind of.
So we have a variety of communities in different parts of the world, and can we say that we have diverse agendas?
I would say yes, and I agree with your statement that they have diverse kind of agendas, because people, for example, who are migrating to Russia, first and foremost, they move there to make their living there, right? So their kind of agenda for a day is like to get a work, to get a small business, and then some of them, they move their families there, so they create these small communities around them. It takes some time. But for diasporas which are, for example, in the United States, they are somehow established. And probably if we do a retrospect during the 1990s, if you remember, there was much more involvement from the diaspora of the United States into Armenia than from the Russian one, because Russian one was an embryo type of diaspora. So well-established, well-framed, business connections, business interests played a huge role during the 1990s from the US side. But nowadays we're seeing very diverse and very interesting projects also coming from the Russian diaspora, for example.
Now that you have an established community there, businessmen, organizations, exactly. And so they are coming back. So they do have diverse agendas, but also there is this discussion going on now, this discourse that, okay, we might have diverse agendas, we might live in different communities, we might remember the past, we might fight for the recognition of the genocide, but we have to live for the future also. The future should be Armenia. Can Armenia be the focal point, as you mentioned earlier in our discussion?
Yeah, I very much hope so, and I believe that year after year, the institutional framework which should be built within the Armenian state would support the premise that all Armenians are welcome here, and then will create an environment within the state which will be conducive for all Armenians to come and to integrate within this society. So at the end of the day, my very hope would be that this would be the focal point of Armenian world. So Yerevan, Armenia in general, will be the focal point. And I believe there is a discourse, not at the level I hope to see at this point, but I think it's a very much, it's a work in progress.
That's good to know. That's good. In your academic world, in your academic work, do you see that discourse? Do you see that discussion, that platform where ideas are coming together to make Armenia the focal point, to make Armenia the future?
Yes. I'll give you just one example, which is Armenian Economic Association, which has been established by several people, some of them living in the United States, some of them living in Western Europe, and some of them living in Armenia, in Yerevan. So this guy came together to establish a forum where young and talented young Armenian economists who study abroad, who study here, can come and present their novel ideas and their papers. And I would say that year after year, we do have an extremely high quality of papers. So we do have a lot of works which is done within Armenia, which is done abroad. But the focal point of work is Armenia.
What is it that that's preventing Armenia from becoming the focal point? You know, Armenians tend to go to many places. I met a Chinese Armenian the other day. He's been there. He's been living in Guangzhou for so many years. He considers himself now a Chinese Armenian, which is natural. And he says there's a growing community there, people coming from all over the world to do business. So Armenians basically go everywhere. Why don't they come to Armenia?
So first, let me tell you that I strongly agree with this premise that there should be kind of a blame game on either side. On diaspora's side, that we don't have a viable state, so there are a lot of problems, so why should we get involved? On the other side, state, we sometimes hear that, okay, we need to get diaspora involved, and they don't want to be involved, and so on and so forth. I think there is no place for that type of blame game. So being said that, and taking into account the fact that we've already mentioned that we are having a diaspora or Armenian world which is extremely heterogeneous, I believe first and foremost it goes on a personal level. So every single person makes a decision for herself or for himself, whether he or she should be involved and at what time, at what speed, in what kind of projects. That's on a personal note. So you are here, right? You are here because you do have a mission, you do have a purpose within you, which is burning. And there is a fire which leads you to do something. And it's not about you being a Russian diasporan or American diasporan, it's Raffi, you personally, living in Armenia, changing Armenia to the bright future and so on. So my understanding of reality is that it's very much personal thing. And I believe there should be a personal fire inside a person to make a change.
Thank you, Mardin. Mardin Galstyan, our guest, a visiting professor at American University of Armenia, an economist. And our discussion was today about Armenia-diaspora relations, shared agenda or diverse agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
You're welcome. And I will be back soon with you again. Thank you.